Hello, everyone. Welcome back to today's podcast. My name is Brittany Simon. In today's podcast, we're just going to have like some fun, okay? It's just going to be like really chill, really demure, very cutesy fun about whether or not you're Glinda or Elphaba. I'm going to use examples that I don't mean quite literally, but I think will be a good example of what I'm trying to convey to you guys. So remember, as a late diagnosed autistic myself and my love for categorization, I'm not here to bubble you, box you, trap you in these categorization systems. I'm simply using tools to better understand people and myself and who I am in the story and who you are in the story. So using Wicked, using Elphaba and Glinda as examples, who are you in the story? Are you an Elphaba or a Glinda? So I have my notes here and that's what I'm going to kind of use to sort of have this conversation. But please, in the comment sections down below, share your examples of Elphaba and Glindas and we can further this conversation. So we're going to start with Glinda. The way that I want to think of her is in three different categories. The Glindas who are born into bubbles and match with its expectations without much question and strongly believe in the bubbles culture and system. So if you're new to my channel, bubbles are just perceptions, and perception is what creates culture and how people socialize. And so when I look at this and I think of a Glinda in this sort of archetype and trope, I think about where she fits into the story. She is somebody who is kind of perfectly born into the bubble and doesn't really have to fight back or rebel or really question a lot about herself, even though all of us, no matter how privileged or no matter how perfect the bubble we're born into is, we have moments of questioning and pondering. So there's going to be levels to this, right? So those Glindas, and I'm using this as a very loose example in terms of branding, of course, because these people are pop stars. You know, I thought I'd use musicians and maybe famous celebrities as examples. Like the Taylor Swift, the Dolly Partons, and the Mariah Careys would be this kind of Glinda. And I'm not saying this is true of the individuals and the consciousness that is those three people, but the way they brand themselves, I would say they fit into that narrative, right? Dolly Parton, Mariah, and Taylor are very well liked. They fit very well into the bubbles. You know, they're not sitting out here and being hardcore activists, even if they do speak up, and they do, even if they do say, oh, this is what I want for humanity in some aspect, it's not the same way as somebody else who ties themselves to a tree and like refuses to move for 30 days because, you know, a forest is about to be chopped down, right? Another way to think of this Glinda category is a perfect person, but that's not a real thing. There's no such thing as a perfect person. So Glinda is the good girl next door, the girl your parents want you to be friends with, the girl who isn't worried about her reputation because it's clean, even if it's not. That's the branding. So Glindas in this category get the benefit of the doubt whenever they do anything, even when they rebel. Though when they rebel, it's cute. Like in the movie, when Glinda changed her name from Glinda to Glinda, it's not real activism, but she gets the benefit of the doubt of being praised anyways because regular society doesn't want your real activism. That's annoying. They want your performative activism. That's cute and perfect. Hence this category of Glinda. So they're a very different kind of Glinda in the world. They're kind of like the beauty pageant queens. They're really well liked from all bubble, like cultural bubbles. People love Mariah Carey. They love Dolly Parton. They love Taylor Swift. You don't have to be niche to like them. Does that kind of make sense? So then there's the Glinda who is born into the bubble, doesn't personally connect with it. They don't have like strong moral ties to the system of the bubble, but they're willing to play the game to sort of win at the bubble or sort of rise the ranks of the bubble. So these Glindas can be seen as good guys or bad guys, but it's really more or less about how they connect to the bubble, how they relate to the world. So I think of Beyonce, Kim Kardashian, and Nicki Minaj. I feel like you have to be specific to understand them and for them to get you as an audience member, but they're still pretty famous and their global reach is there, but yet they themselves are sort of tied to a strategy. Like Beyonce's been strategy driven since she was a kid. Kim Kardashian's whole career is a strategy, and Nicki knew as a teenager she wanted to be famous, and she made she had a plan when entering this world. She had a very specific plan. And technically, all three of them have been wrapped in controversy over the years and connected to sort of business marriages and business decisions, and everything they do, even in their personal life, is like business. This category of Glinda is edgy business versus good girl Glinda, and versus authentic edgy, which we're going to cover next, versus Dolly Parton or Taylor Swift or Mariah Carey. That might feel true to some people, but that's not what the brand is letting us know, right? So the brand of these people is that they're strategic. So again, we're not being literal about the consciousness that is these people, because they do exist, but the brand that they signal to the community sort of fits this kind of Glinda. The third kind of Glinda is a little bit different. A Glinda who understands the bubble but doesn't fit into it, but actually does have a place in it all the same. And they're kind of Glindas that I call Elphabas. So they are Glindas. They're not full Elphabas, but they're the Elphabas of the Glindas. So the example I gave is Lady Gaga, Paris Hilton, and Cardi B, because as much as Gaga is famous and tries to play the game constantly, she never quite fits in the same way. And it's because I think there is a level of authenticity to her belief systems, but I'm not sure which part, because she's obviously smart enough to become Gaga, right? She planned it, but I don't think it was in the same way Kardashian planned it. Paris Hilton, though born into privilege and has a lot of fame, also has a lot of authenticity to her and does spend a lot of her time being an activist because of a lived personal experience she had growing up. So there's something there that's more authentic. And Cardi B, who again has a lot of authenticity to her and did play some sort of a game to get famous, also is the more authentic sort of experience. So I think they're all Glindas at the end of the day, but they're Glindas who are Elphabas. And this might sound silly and you might not know what I'm talking about. So, if you're not into categorization systems, I get it, but I'm not trying to trap any of these people either. I'm just trying to say, like, who are you in the story? Are you more of a Cardi B or a Nicki Minaj? Are you more of a Taylor Swift or a Beyonce? Because like these are different kinds of people. Not the literal people that they are, but what they represent. Because we all are tropes in a story. We're all archetypes. We're all characters. And so the question is, who am I? And yes, you can change who you are. Example, in the movie Wicked, the prince, he's like this perfect Glinda type character. He's this perfect, they even have a song about being perfect together. This perfect, everybody wants to be him, but he has an internal compass that's spinning. He's thinking, he's changing, and boom, now he's changing his category. He becomes a Glinda that is aware of the system. Now he has to decide how to play into that. Does he play the game like our Glinda does in the movie at the end? Or does it do the sort of Glinda who's an Elphaba move? And I think ultimately, and I don't know what happens in Act 2, but in Act 1, it seems like he's a Glinda who becomes an Elphaba Glinda. Not a Glinda who becomes a full Elphaba yet. I don't know what his story is, but by the end of the first movie, he's more like a Glinda who's an Elphaba. You know what I'm saying? Okay, so Elphabas, let's go through this because this is kind of interesting to my brain. Elphaba, one category, strong sense of justice, enough to break away from expectations, even willing to be seen as the bad guy in the name of what they think is right. So think activists. And I'm going to let you go ahead and think, in the comment section down below who you think might fit into this. But somebody who's an activist, somebody who's still in the bubble and is fighting within the constructs of that bubble, right? But they are the sort of weirdo or enemy or loudmouth that people maybe find annoying, but is truly fighting for a real sense of justice, right? So that kind of represents the Elphaba in the movie towards the end, of course. And then the Elphaba who doesn't fit in and doesn't care to try, but is functional within the larger bubble, but finds themselves fitting into niche community bubbles. So for this example, I gave like Grimes, FKA Twigs, artists that are popular enough and pretty enough to benefit from pretty privilege, of course, but to be famous in niche communities that make them not a reject of society, but a weirdo who was able to get stability in society. So sort of like in the movie, you'll see Elphaba get Glindified, and it doesn't last for her because she can't maintain it. But there are the Elphabas who are sort of able to be popular in their own niche, versus our Elphaba in the movie was not able to figure that out without the connections and networking of Glinda, right? And then there's the Elphaba who doesn't fit into the bubble, isn't a community member, and is more of a monk Elphaba. And the contrast to this Elphaba is the Glinda that's the guru and is famous. So there's the there's the Galendas, who are like the famous gurus that have the New York Times best-selling book and is like always on Oprah. And then in contrast, there's the Elphaba, who's authentically like meditating in the mountains and seeks no validation or fame or being on Oprah. And I think this type of Elphaba would have been really cool to see in the movie, but we didn't. And this is a very different particular Elphaba anyways. Most people aren't going to be this, because it's like they're very focused on like their isolated sort of, one life on Earth type thing. And they're not usually as connected, but they are still and can be associated with the bubble. So again, nothing wrong with being a bubble, nothing wrong with being, in a bubble, nothing wrong with being Glinda, nothing wrong with being Elphaba. The only thing you want to pay attention to is which kind of variation of that are you in the story, and does it work with your values and your joy? So I fluctuate. I actually think between a lot of these where, I'm obviously an Elphaba character. I think that makes sense. I've been that way my whole life. It just fits everything that I've ever been in my whole life. But I have wondered, why can't I be a Glinda? Now, it's not just because I'm not blonde, but I think that plays a role. I don't fit the stereotype of what people largely find interesting or attractive. Not that I'm calling myself ugly. I'm calling myself niche, which I'm okay with, because once you know your niche, everything in life gets easy. But if you go around trying to fit into a niche you're not a part of, it's very confusing. Or if you try to fit into the popular crowd when you were never meant to be popular, it's confusing. Now, obviously, racism plays a huge role in this and the way culture has shifted. So if you're in the American bubble, the reason, a lot of people would say Beyonce hasn't risen to Taylor Swift's status is racism. And I would probably 100% agree. I think one of the reasons Beyonce's end up playing more of a political game is because they're born into the world where they have to play one in a much more strategic way than a Taylor Swift or a Dolly Parton, who get a lot more choices in terms of playing hardcore games or not in the world. That doesn't mean, again, that I know anything about these people, but I'm just saying the way that their brand works, the way that they express themselves. If you've ever watched a Taylor Swift interview, Taylor is a brand. She's very strategic, but I think she gets the luxury of thinking she isn't one over a Beyonce, who I think when people talk about her basically express how much of a brand she is. Again, I am very aware that Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce and all of their relationships are considered a huge brand move. There is a lot of conspiracy theory around them dating for publicity, absolutely happening behind the scenes. But if you just look at the branding, again, not the criticism of the branding, but the branding itself, the Beyonce branding and the Taylor branding are different because they have to be in a lot of ways. Beyonce can't just be Taylor Swift and Taylor can't be Beyonce. They have to stick to their lanes in quotations. And really what they're really doing is like figuring out who they want to be in the story and staying with it. I mean, you could see how, mental health can play a role in the deviation of those plans, like with Britney Spears, or you can see somebody like a Pink. Pink, I really struggled to categorize her. Is Pink an Elphaba who is finding a niche community, or is Pink a Glinda who's an Elphaba? I think Pink might be a Glinda who's an Elphaba. She's widely well-liked. She's been well-liked since she was a teenager. She's rose to fame. She's generally accepted. She's niche and unique, but she isn't actually as Elphaba as I thought she would be. So I kind of struggled where to place her. And again, this isn't to be mean. I'm not casting judgment. I'm just saying, I think that's where they might fall. And again, it's hard to say because I'm not really talking about the consciousness. I'm talking about the brand that we consume. And if we went to TV characters, a good example is like an Azula and a Zuko. So Azula is the Glinda that's born into the perfect bubble for her. She's not playing some sort of game, even though she is playing one. She's playing into the bubble that she fits into, which is a game which is a bubble that's all games. Like she's in this Fire Nation bubble, which is all games, all strategy, all politics, and Azula's perfect for it. If she didn't kind of lose her mind, I think she would have risen on the ranks. Zuko, on the other hand, was born into this bubble and realized I don't want to be in this bubble. I don't want to play these games. I just want to be myself. I want to be free. So that's kind of like a Glinda born into, because I don't think Zuko's an Elphaba born into a Glinda bubble. I think he's a Glinda who doesn't want to fit into the bubble and wants to do his own thing. But maybe he isn't a Glinda who's an Elphaba. Or is he an Elphaba pretending to be a Glinda? It's hard to say. I would argue that Uncle Iroh is more of a Elphaba masquerading as a Glinda, but actually is an Elphaba at the end, because he literally leaves the whole world. He is the Uncle Iroh and Korra, when he leaves the physical world to go live in the spirit world full time. He's the last section of the Elphabas, the monk category, where he no longer adhered to the Fire Nation bubble. His role as an uncle, his role as a mentor, he left. He went on to do a very solo journey. You could look at Toph. Toph has always been an Elphaba, obviously, but an Elphaba masquerading as a Glinda for her family. And then Toph leaves her Glinda bubble, embraces full Elphaba, but she's the Elphaba who also ends up being more of the monk Elphaba. Maybe not in such a enlightened way as Uncle Iroh, but in an isolated sort of way. Or maybe she's an Elphaba who doesn't fit in and isn't worried about it in some aspect. I stand by that. No, I stand by what I said. She's an Elphaba who is the solo Elphaba by the end of Korra. So, depending on how well you know these characters, it might be more confusing for you. I'd love to hear your insight and your thoughts about who's who and where you fit in. But I think I've already seen some comments from you guys on my last stream that you were like, oh my gosh, I'm an Elphaba who has been trying to be a Glinda and it's not working. Like, I have a friend who's definitely a Glinda who's an Elphaba, where like, she looks the part, you would think she would do it, but she has too much of a sense of justice to perfectly fit into that like perfect bubble role. When you have a sense of justice, whether good or bad, because, when it comes to autism, it's definitely a disability sometimes. But when you have a strong sense of values or morals, let's say it like that, you can't fit into any bubble perfectly unless you are very rarely lucky enough to be born into the absolute perfect bubble for you. Most of us aren't. Most of us, if we have any deviation from the expectation of the cultural bubble, we're going to have chaos, right? And we're not going to go more into the bubble. We're going to go less away from it. So even my friends that are Glindas, if they have any sort of activism or sense of justice, I also place them as Elphabas who are Glindas. They're not perfectly brought into the popular, the mainstream, the big, the expectation. And I think that's what's pretty cool about people is we can change our story. One, like the prince. Two, we can move closer to our joy, like Elphaba. Three, we can choose to play the game and be ruthless at it, like Glinda at the end of the movie. We can do so much in our life. And it's really about, in my opinion, what leads you closer to your joy. So joy isn't just happiness. In a philosophical sense, joy to me is a positive symbiotic relationship with you and yourself and you and the outside of yourself. So your existing and your existence. And I think this is really difficult for people because we're usually taught to adhere to the bubble and the cultural expectations, much like you see Glinda and Elphaba fighting in the end, which is right, which is the right direction. And this is that tension. Now, I think for some of us, we think of ourselves as, and you can think of Harry Potter, if you will, the Gryffindors, the heroes, the people that do the right thing on behalf of everyone. But see how they're not the main character in their own story? They're the main character for everybody else. Then there's the Slytherins or even the Ravenclaws, who are kind of the main characters in their own life, but not in anybody else's. And that's kind of nice, unless you're a bad guy Slytherin, and then you're the bad guy villain main character in other people's lives, like Voldemort. And then, of course, you have the Hufflepuffs, which are a little different. Community members, builders, caretakers. Everyone has a categorization. And the question is, are you happy with it? Do you want to change it? Do you want to improve upon it? And then where do you go from here? I think of my life in regards to this, even when it comes to gender. I have one categorization for my gender, and then I have another categorization for how I feel about my gender. I have categorizations based off of how I grow and change. Even when it comes to sexual orientation, my categorization has changed over the years. I think I'm one of those fluid people, those people who have a different biological experience where every time I grow and I change as a person, so do my labels. And I'm good with that. My partner's good with it. And those, I'm the only person who has to be good with it. I don't need the world to also always be updated on my labels. I need to know I need to know how to play the right social games when I'm interacting with people based off of my internal compass and my external signaling. So I just want to always make sure that I'm signaling the good parts of my intentions, and any parts in which I feel like the world isn't owed my authenticity, I have to remember that they're not owed that authenticity. There's this illusion we have that tells us the world is owed our authenticity, that we're the bad people if we're not authentic all the time. But I don't think that's correct. And maybe it's the autistic part of my experience where I took that a little too literally growing up. When people say, just be yourself, I realized okay, they don't literally mean that. They don't actually want you to be yourself. What they want you to be is enough of yourself to get along with the people you're in front of, which I'm happy to do. I'm happy to play a proper social game. I think that's appropriate. And I actually think the most free I personally feel is when I'm alone, when I'm with my partner, when I'm in this bubble that I've created for myself, because I can be 100% my authentic self and it's accepted and understood and known. Now, to be fair, and I think this coincides with my theory about all of the parts of self, I don't think I've ever met anyone in my whole life that sees every part of me and is able to naturally and authentically actually be with me as my authentic self. So I also think it's about timing, which is why I really recommend you figure out this by yourself. Because when I was single, I loved being alone. I loved being with myself. Once I learned who I was, once I had a relationship with myself, I was like, oh, I'm really great company. And I could still maintain friendships. I still have great close friendships. I have great working relationships. I have great everything socially. That's not the problem. The problem was my misunderstanding of be your authentic self, of show your friends everything that you are, and the misunderstanding of we should get along perfectly. I don't need to get along perfectly with everybody, but we just have to have enough in common and enough value shared to move the relationships forward, which is exactly what I hope for the world. I hope for the world that we just have enough overlap to move forward. But obviously, the world is divisive and it's going to be pretty intense for the next 4 years. And I think this movie is a good example of why, because if you look at Wicked in the political dynamics, this is just a part of one bubble in the world. Every relationship, every natural structure has some sort of social, I don't want to say game being played, but social, there is I don't want to use the word hierarchy, I sound like Jordan Peterson, but there is a push and pull. And because there is a push and pull, there has to be a dynamic at play. And because there's dynamics at play, there's a hierarchy. Because there's a hierarchy, it's going to get messy. And so we're always shifting between these dynamics and these hierarchies. And we're always trying to figure out how to socialize in the proper way to move forward and to feel good about ourselves. I want you to feel good about yourself. So if throughout this categorization system, you thought to yourself, I don't want to be this. I want to be someone different. You can be someone different. As long as that person you want to be coincides with your joy. If you try to be a Glinda when you are an Elphaba, you will never be joyful. If you try to be an Elphaba when you are a Glinda, you will never be joyful. You can only ever be the person you are when you're joyful in order to be joyful. You cannot manufacture your joy. Your joy is found in the positive symbiotic relationship you have with yourself existing and everything outside of your self existence. And this is the hardest part as a person is, how do I accept that I'll never be the thing that I think I want to be because I'm convinced that if I'm this thing, I'll be happy and joyful? The lesson you must learn in life is that you're never the thing you want to be, or the thing you want to be is never exactly your joy, but instead it's letting it be whatever it is. I remember going through therapy and I remember having the realization that I was trying to be somebody. Like I was looking at a character in an anime or looking at a character in a book or looking at a character and I was like, I want to be that, instead of actually just being joyful. And then accepting whatever that ended up looking like, that's who I was. So after therapy, I decided to go on a road trip, travel around the US solo. I did this multiple times. I decided to find myself and meditate in the mountains. I decided to do all these things and I came away joyful. And the person that I ended up being was this. And I'm really okay with that. I think I let go of needing to be the thing I thought I wanted to be. And I accepted that I would be the thing I was as long as I was joyful. And it's true. Like, it's hard to say it out loud because if you had told me 10 years ago, like, just be joyful and you'll be happy, like, it wouldn't have been enough. I'd be like, no, I have to have certain hair or certain clothes or maybe even drive a certain car. And now it just, like, none of the things I thought I wanted, I ended up needing. Now I have exactly what I need and therefore I have exactly what I want. And so my tool for you today is to figure out who you are in the story, a Glinda or an Elphaba, and then which subcategory of those are you? And if you seek out your joy, how much will that categorization change? And are you ready to be joyful? Are you ready to be happy? Are you ready to go to bed every day happy and wake up every day happy? Because ever since I found my joy, I've gone to bed every day happy and woken up every day happy. Still in pain because, chronic health. Still socially awkward because, neurodivergency. Still trying to pay her rent like everybody else. So capitalism, you know how it is. But the joy maintains. Even when the world feels like it's in chaos, internally, I'm chilling. Even when chaos hits my own life, feels like I'm in the middle of the tornado. And I try to have it happen around me instead of within me. Even when I'm stressed and my body is feeling that stress, I try to remind myself, like, the consciousness that's in my head, that voice inside my head that's like, girl, I wish we could sleep right now, but we are stressed and we can't sleep. I'm accepting that my body's on a journey, that it's going to shut down when it's ready, and that I'm here to ride the wave of it. I stopped fighting the wave and I learned to let it roll me out to the shore. I stopped fighting the wave and I let it spit me out when it was ready. I stopped fighting the ocean because I never stood a chance anyways. But the arrogance I had, or rather the fear I had that made me want to fight against it, was exactly the thing that was holding me back. Me. So before we start, before we decide like who's a good guy and who's a bad guy, I think we should first decide who we are in the story and then decide if we want to change it. Because I've also noticed that a lot of Elphabas think they're the bad guys. You're not a bad guy. You're just green. You're just green. So figure it out. Make sure you know who you are in the story before you decide you're a good guy or a bad guy. All right, guys, that's it for today. Thank you for being here. I really do appreciate it. Please let me know in the comment sections down below if you're a Glinda or an Elphaba, and I will see you next podcast. Bye.
Stuck in my head, in real life I'm in bed, my belly's being fed and I'm okay. I'm just fine, yet all I do is whine, not to you in my mind, cause I know I don't make sense. I've been nothing but blessed, so why's my life a mess? Please tell me, cause I'm sick of thinking, yeah, I'm sick of reaching out for the truth and living life as a fool.